Please be seated, men. If you remember long ago, before the feast, was the last class, and we left off on page 263. 263 was the last page. Now the Kahan started a new chapter. This was chapter 6, the plan of Yahweh from the beginning, part 2. According to Yahweh's plan, Satan is the god of this world. And that's what this refers to, is that Satan is still the god of this world. The whole world is tempted by Satan. And the whole world worships Satan. So let's start off here on page 264. Top of the page. And it says, it's written in Acts 17, verses 30 to 31, that Yahweh winks at our ignorance. He winks at our ignorance. Okay, that's if we're ignorant. All right, and he says, but think how serious of a matter it is for you to continue to practice a sin after you see scriptural evidence that your church or your assembly is leading you down the path that goes against the word of Yahweh. So Yahweh says he winks at our ignorance. But however, once we have been given and shown the truth, then it's up to us to do something about it, because then we're no longer ignorant once you know and see something. So he says, if you keep every law of Yahweh but one, you're still guilty of having broken all of Yahweh's laws. You know, and the reason is because if you have disrespect for one law of Yahweh and you break one law of Yahweh, it leads to another and another and another, because Yahweh's laws are units. Remember, the scripture says it's a body of laws, okay? It's a body of laws that makes up, the ones who keep that body of laws make up the body of Messiah. The body of Messiah is the house of Yahweh, which is the family of Yahweh. The family of Yahweh is Yahweh to each other, and Yahweh is to his people, our Heavenly Father, the head. So it's all united together. So if you break one law, you separate yourself. And that's the thing, you become a separatist, okay? You separate yourself from the laws of Yahweh. If you break one law, then you separate yourself by the whole body of laws, which separates you from the body of Messiah, plain and simple. Now it says here that if you keep all the laws, okay, except for one law that says you must go to the house of Yahweh, the place where Yahweh has chosen to establish his name in order to keep his ordained feast, this one law you don't want to keep, so you refuse to obey the law. Now, you got to realize something, okay? It's the law says, we didn't write these prophecies. This is Yahweh's word. And Yahweh says he's chosen one place. It doesn't matter what anybody says. It doesn't matter what they want to argue about. They can keep the feast here. They can keep the feast there. They can do whatever they want. Yeah, they can gather wherever they want. And everybody thinks that they're worshiping Yahweh. But Yahweh says, he's written this down. He is the author of this word. This is his law. And he said that you must go to the place, right? One place. You can't go to other places, just different places, wherever you feel like. You must go to the place. It's plain and simple the way it's written. There's only one place, and it doesn't matter what anybody else says. You know, they try and justify themselves in their sin, thinking that they can go to different places to keep the feast, but you can't. You've got one place to go. So, if you keep all the other laws, but you refuse to keep that one law, you're breaking all the other laws. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about the other 99% of the laws that you keep. It means nothing to Yahweh because you refuse that one law. And we have to obey Yahweh and keep all of his laws. So Yahweh ordained this law in order to teach us that all of his called out ones have to come together to keep his feast. And that's where you learn to love each other. You learn one another to love one another by serving one another, by caring about one another. This is why we were created. You know, mankind could have been created as just one man. That's it. You know, one big huge body, and we could all be different cells within this whole big body. You know, but that's not the way it is. Yahweh made us as different individuals, but he made us to be as one, thinking as one, and loving one another together as one. So, Yahweh ordained his law to keep us together. And that is when we come together at Yahweh's feast, we learn to practice the second greatest commandment in the law of Yahweh. Now in Matthew 22, verse 34, it says, "Now when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they came together. And one of them, a Mason, the lawyer, came to test him and to entrap him, saying, 'Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?'" It was like as if he came to make this big statement, and to try and to impress everybody. It's like, well, what is the greatest commandment, And he did it with the intent to try to entrap Yahshua, because if Yahshua answered a certain law, then he would say, well, what about this law over here? Why are you leaving this one out? So it was a trap. And Yahshua said to him, of course he quoted from Deuteronomy 6 verse 5, "You must love Yahweh your Father with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might." You see that? You must. There's no other way. You must love Yahweh with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your might. You can't just do it when you feel like it. You can't just do it part-time. It has to be all. When Yahweh says all, he means all. It's always. And that never changes. And he says this is the first and the greatest commandment. Because if you love Yahweh with all of your heart, all of your soul, all of your might, you're going to keep every law that Yahweh said. Plain and simple. He said that's the first and the greatest. And the second is like it. And he quoted Leviticus 19:18. "And you shall love your brother or your neighbor as yourself." And that's where he said, on these two laws hang all of the laws of Yahweh. The entire body of laws hang upon those two laws. And the reason being is because if you keep those two laws, you're going to keep every one of the 613 laws of Yahweh. Because you'll love it. Because they're all based upon loving your neighbor as yourself and then loving Yahweh. So those are the two greatest. And they were astonished at that. You notice before that his answer was to him that, he silenced the Sadducees, and now he silenced this lawyer as well. So those whom Yahweh is calling out now, they're the ones who will be ruling under Yahshua in Yahweh's kingdom during the millennial reign, as Revelations 20 verses 4 through 6 says. You know what the millennial reign is? You know what a millennium is? 1,000 years. Okay? This is the 1,000 years that comes about when Yahshua, comes and sets up the kingdom. This is the first 1,000 years of the kingdom. This would be the time when we'll use all those microbes to clean up everything. Clean up all of the earth and bring it back to its original state. And the way the earth was in the beginning, it was a beautiful place. But then, of course, Satan came in and her and her buddies went in and destroyed the place. Okay? So when Yahweh prepared it for mankind, he got them out of the way, and then he ended up using the microbes, commanding them to just go in to renew the face of this earth. Okay? So he reestablished it and renewed the face of the earth, and used the existing material that was there. And when he did that, he got it ready for mankind. And then he's preparing it for us in these last days as well, getting it ready. Everything has to suffer, though. If we don't suffer, even the microbes, they're going to be rejoicing, but they have to suffer too, and that's the thing. They suffer because of man's sin. But you have to suffer in order to receive the glory, because the glory will be that you will always glorify Yahweh and lift up his laws, and you'll never, ever desire to sin, nor will you ever want to see anyone else sin, because you realize what sin brings. And when we go to these other planets, that's what we're going to be thinking about, and remembering our past lives, and remembering the things that we went through, and the suffering that we went through, the pain that we experienced, and realize that, they're going to suffer the same thing if they don't change. And so we're going to be bringing them relief from all of these things. Well, these are the ones who keep Yahweh's laws will be the ones who will be in this millennial reign. However, if one refuses to go to the place that Yahweh has chosen to establish his name, his habitation, the house of Yahweh, and thereby refusing to learn to love his brother as himself, as Yahweh himself has commanded, then he's broken one point of the law, a very major point of the law. Because unless you come to Yahweh's house, you can never learn the laws of Yahweh. Okay? That's one of the laws of Yahweh, is keep my Sabbath at my sanctuary. And unless someone can come to Yahweh's house, they cannot fully grow in Yahweh and fully understand all things. And this is why it's going to be such great rejoicing when all of the nations, Yahweh will be able to call everyone out and they will be able to come to Abel itself. But it's this one place, and if you refuse to come to the place that Yahweh has chosen to place his name, then Yahweh's not going to be there, plain and simple. He just won't be there. So you have to come to learn all of this law. Now, if you're guilty of breaking this law, then you're guilty of breaking all of Yahweh's laws, and you're guilty. You're even guilty of murder, which is the sixth commandment, and guilty of adultery, which is the seventh commandment, and guilty of theft, of false testimony. You're guilty of murder because of the fact that you don't love your neighbor as yourself, and so you're allowing your neighbor to die. And adultery because of the fact that the laws of Yahweh are not taught, so this world continues to go into the adultery, which is also God worship. And of theft because you're stealing from Yahweh and you're stealing from your fellow man and you're bringing false testimony to him. And that's what these churches do. You know, these churches are bringing false testimony every time that preacher opens his mouth and teaches the people, because he's teaching them lies. Now Romans 6:16 says, do you not know to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey his servants you are to whom you obey, whether of sin which leads to death or obedience which leads to righteousness? You know, that's plain and simple, isn't it? To those who have the understanding, but it's not to the world. Remember that, okay? You can read something and understand it. You have been given the ability to read something and to understand it. That is tremendous. That is just totally awesome. You know, but we take it for granted, don't we? We really do. We don't think about it. But it's something that Yahweh has given unto us. It's a tremendous blessing. So he says, if you yield yourself. Now yielding, everybody knows what that means when you're driving the car. You know, if you don't yield, there's going to be danger there, right? If you're not looking out. You yield yourself. That means you completely give yourself over to it. You give the right of way to Yahweh, right? Because you want to go the right way. Okay, so you give yourself over to Yahweh as servants to obey. And if you do, if you give yourself over to Yahweh to become his servant, then you are his servant. He will gladly accept you because you desire to obey him. But if you can choose either sin, which leads to death. You know, dying you will die. It's not an immediate thing, but you're going to die. That is fact. That's why Yahweh says, curses are curses. And I will spare you of the curse, or you can receive it. The choice is yours. And that's why it says obedience which leads to righteousness. If we're obedient, we'll be found righteous. We'll keep all of Yahweh's laws, and Yahweh will find it acceptable, and he will actually make us into himself. Isn't that incredible? Yahweh will make us into himself. That's what he's doing with us right now. You know, we can't fathom that because the fact that our little finite minds, you know, we're flesh and blood, you know, we cut ourselves and you know, we start bleeding. Okay? But Yahweh's making us into himself. And that's the beautiful part about it. One day we'll understand that completely. But when one refuses to live by every word of Yahweh, as we're instructed to do in Matthew 4:4, Deuteronomy 8:3, then you become a servant of the adversary. Okay, you become a servant of the adversary who sinned from the beginning. Remember, your teacher is the devil who sinned from the beginning and didn't remain in the truth, which shows the fact that Satan was presented the truth. She was presented these things. And remember, what is the truth? Psalm 119, 142 tells us that Yahweh's law is the truth, and also in verse 151. So the truth is Yahweh's laws. And it always think about when Yahshua stood before Pilate, you know, and Pilate asked him, he says, what is truth? You know, because he couldn't understand it. It wasn't given to him to understand. But Satan sinned from the beginning and didn't remain in the truth, okay? She rebelled against Yahweh. Remember that. She rebelled against Yahweh. She didn't remain in the laws of Yahweh. She lifted herself up as a god, became a god, and she turned herself against Yahweh, divorced him, and went out and committed adultery and so forth. So, anyone who follows that same pathway actually follows Satan herself and becomes a servant of Satan. And that's what Satan preachers do too. Those who listen to him, they're doing the same thing. They're becoming her servants. In Yahshua 8:45, Yahshua said, yet I tell you the truth, but you don't believe me. Can you imagine that? Here's someone telling you the truth, but you're not going to believe him. In fact, not only are you not going to believe him, but you build up a hatred for him. And you despise them because they tell you the truth. Yet, let Joe the liar come up to you and fill your mind full of deception. You believe him. He's your buddy. But yet someone tell you the truth, you hate them. This is the test that the house of Yahweh has to go through. This is why Yahshua said you will be hated above all people. Because Yahweh has to try us. We have to be tried and tested to see whether we will remain faithful when people hate us, or will we just try and remain faithful when everything is going smooth for us. See, because when the enemies come against us, Yahweh says he will, don't be swept away in the flood, but stand strong and you will be able to stand up there. Because he says, I'm going to break you down if you don't, in front of them. But it's a test. And that's why he tests us, to prove us, to make us worthy in his eyes. That's the same reason why it says that it's beneficial for us to be afflicted. Why? Why is it beneficial to be afflicted? Well, because when you're sick, and when you're feeling bad, and when you're going through various trials and tests that just tears you down and wears you down, Yahweh wants to know, will you say, oh, the old days were better than these, and the scripture warns you against that too, saying that a fool says the days of old were better than the days today, because in the days of old you were further away from Yahweh. You were caught up in the sin. You didn't even realize that you were sinning at that time. But to be afflicted, Yahweh tests us to see, will we thank him only when all things are going well, or will we thank him when we're in tremendous pain as well? But the horrible thing and the worst thing about feeling bad is it tends to make you think about yourself. And that's what you have to be careful about, because even though you tend to concentrate more on the pain that you're in rather than serving your brother. And that's where we have to fight against and stand up. And that's the true test that Yahweh wants to see. Will we continue to remain faithful to our brothers, even when we're being afflicted? So Yahshua said, because I tell you Yahweh's laws, which is the truth, you don't believe me. And then he said, so I'll speak the truth. And so if I speak the truth, why do you not believe me? You can't convict me of sin because I haven't sinned. I've been telling you the truth, teaching you the laws of Yahweh, but you don't hear these things. And that's what he says next. In verse 47, he says, he who is of Yahweh hears Yahweh's words. Now you do not hear because you are not of Yahweh. Think about that. Those who are of Yahweh hear Yahweh's words, which shows us that not everyone can hear. And that's why it says, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who has eyes to see, let them see. But not everyone can hear Yahweh's word. This is why you can go and you can tell people about the unclean and explain it fully to them. And to them, clean means that they washed it. That's clean. You know, it doesn't sink into their heads because they cannot hear Yahweh's word. It hasn't been given to them. These are all things that we have to remember. We're a very small group of people. And Yahweh's people have always been a very small amount of people throughout the history of mankind. But these are Yahshua's own words. And he's saying here that if you are of Yahweh, then you will hear Yahweh's words and do them. But if you are not, then you belong to Satan the adversary, whom you serve because you obey her. Now the whole world is worshiping, this whole world is worshiping Satan. Revelations 12:9 says Satan has the whole world deceived. That's absolute fact. You can't get out of it. The whole world is deceived. Satan's got the whole world. You know, it's hers. And this authority was given to her by Yahweh. He did that on purpose. Just like he gave you a cardinal mind, which is at enmity with Yahweh. It's totally against Yahweh. It's hatred for Yahweh. And he put it in you, and he allowed you to be born into a world of sin. And Scripture says that we were born in iniquity. You know, our mothers conceived us in iniquity. We were born into a world of sin. Grew up to hate Yahweh. It's Satan's world. There's no other way. And Yahweh shows us his power, that he allows this to take place, and then at the time when he calls us, he flips that little switch, and those little microbes go to work in our brain, and they begin to hit those synapses, and the understanding comes to pass. And then we begin to realize, who Yahweh is, and we begin to understand what his Sabbath day is about. We begin to keep these things, and then we start having an understanding of his law. But until then, we belong to Satan until Yahweh buys us back. Now, the whole deceived world at this time is worshiping Satan, whether it's a church, whether it's an assembly. Now, the assemblies, they think they're better than the churches because they're assemblies, but they're not. They're the same. Or synagogue. Well, surely the Jews are the chosen people of God, right? Yes, they are. That's why it's called a synagogue. They go there and sin a lot. Or a group, a group of people, okay? People think, I'm in non-denominational church. I'm non-denominational, so therefore, I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, it makes them holier, But all of them, they all belong to Satan. And they don't even realize it. They don't realize that they're worshiping Satan. If they did, then they'd wake up. But they don't. And the proof is found, of course, in Yachanaan 8:47, Romans 6:16, as we read. And either you obey Yahweh's every word by doing it, or you belong to the one who teaches you to break Yahweh's laws, Satan herself. And in 2 Corinthians 4:4, it says, for the God of this world, okay, the God of this world. Now we know the God of this world, who the God of this world is. It's Satan. Satan has the whole world. It's hers. It's been given to her to deceive the whole world. She is the God of this world. Okay? Has blinded, notice. The God of this world has blinded the minds of those who do not believe. And Yahshua said, believe all that the prophets have spoken. So that, in other words, so she blinded them so that they don't believe, to keep the light of the message of the Messiah from entering into their hearts and their minds. Okay? That light is blinded. Notice the contrast. She's blinded the mind so that the light can't shine. Okay? Remember what Yahshua said, you are the light of the world. You've got to let your light shine before men. But these people are blinded. Okay, so they won't show forth that message, the laws of Yahweh, to the glory of the Messiah. The glory of the Messiah is the fact that as we keep Yahweh's laws, he is our head. We are the body of Messiah. He is our head. So therefore we're glorifying the Messiah, who is the image of Yahweh. He's the firstborn. He's the only one made into the image of Yahweh. So this keeps from shining in them. Now that word blind, okay, it means to obscure. Obscure, which means to be not to be able to see clearly. Okay? Now remember, that should trigger prophecies in your head and stuff. Remember when it talks about pastor, okay? Yahweh says, Israel, you will make things manifest. Okay? I've called you to make things, all things manifest. That word manifest means to make clear. Okay? When he teaches in Oki style, he's making clear the word of Yahweh. And that word blinded also means opaque, as if smoky, smoke, where there's this haze, so it keeps you from seeing things clearly. It keeps this perspective of things out of focus, because if something is smoky in front of you, you can't really judge a distance of something in front of you. So therefore, sin can creep up on you real easy and real fast, because you can't see it coming upon you. It means also, this word blinded means to inflate yourself with self-conceit. Inflate yourself with self-conceit. And that's exactly what you see. These people get high-minded. What do you mean? I have to go to the house of Yahweh in Abilene. I am the house of Yahweh. I can go wherever I want. We can keep the feast over here. I keep the Sabbath day. They become full of self-conceit. They become conceited within themselves. It also means to be high-minded and to be lifted up with pride. Okay? That's what this word blinded means. They become lifted up with pride. And they become high-minded. Sound like God to you? Huh? What did Satan do? You are created being, Satan. Though you have lifted yourself up and said, I'm going to be the Most High. I will lift myself up and raise myself above the congregation. She lifted herself up. She became high-minded. So in other words, by blinding the minds of the people, these people become gods themselves in their own minds. They're actually legends in their own minds. But they become servants of Satan. She makes them into gods. She makes them like herself. And that's why it says, you are a servant to whom you obey. If you obey Satan, you're going to be just like Satan. And you're turning yourself into Satan. She already bought you. You're already bought. But that's why it says, if you come to Yahweh's house and then you leave what Yahweh has given into you, you're worse than the dog. Like the dog turning around eating its own vomit. Because that's what you look like. Now, and if you follow these blind leaders of the blind, those who fall again, this is what those who have fallen away from Yahweh's house need to realize. If you follow these blind leaders of the blind, those who fight against and resist the laws of Yahweh, you will most definitely lose your salvation, as Yahshua said. Matthew 15:14. Let them alone, for they are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, then both of them are going to fall into the ditch. Because they're blinded. There is no leader there for them to see the light. There is no light. Remember how Scripture talks about the darkness? And it says, the darkness, but we are not children of darkness any longer. We are children of light. We have seen the light, the laws of Yahweh, and we abide by them. And we make them our life. So there's no darkness in those who follow the light. Now, let's see how this world is steeped in the worship of Satan. Because the definitions of those words have been translated worship. Yet any reliable Bible dictionary will show you. The majority of this world, they think that they know what the definition of the word worship is, but they only think that they know. They think it's to fall down on your knees, and pray towards, or maybe face towards Jerusalem. Okay, you got to be facing towards Jerusalem for your prayers to get answered. Because, if you turn in the other direction, they'll go to that end of the earth. But if you turn towards Jerusalem, man, your words are just going to keep on traveling. They're going to go, over the mountain, up above the mountain, down the mountain, and through the valley, around the corner. And they're going to end up going across and floating on those waves all the way across the ocean, going there, meeting down, the streets, and boop, right there. It's going to find its location, right there. Where's it going to go? It just says Jerusalem. but there ain't no temple there, so it's just going to have to stop at the wall. So that's why they got the Wailing Wall, because all these prayers that everybody's talking about, they're all doing this number, and they all stop at that wall, because there's a wall that stops them. So it's a wailing wall. It's just wailing. And it's got everybody's prayers lined up there, but none of them's going to get answered. That makes as much sense as what they believe in, Kneeling down and praying towards a direction. How stupid. Remember, Pastor gave a whole bunch of sermons about Daniel when he opened up, the window and prayed. Now, the bottom line is worship means service, okay? So, turn over to page 268 there. And remember, we read where it says that your servants to whom you obey in Romans 6:16. But who does this world obey? Now, the sincere people of this world, they would reject even the idea of saying that they're praying to Satan. In fact, they would get so indignant and angry with you if you told them, even insinuated the idea that they're worshiping Satan. But the bottom line is they are. Plain and simple. You worship whom you obey. If you obey Yahweh, you're worshiping Yahweh. You're serving Yahweh. If you obey Satan, you're worshiping her. And by not keeping that one law that we talked about earlier about going to the place of the house of Yahweh, the place where Yahweh has established, that cuts them off right there. And if they're cut off, they belong to Satan. They don't belong to Yahweh. And that's why this whole world is underneath the worship of the God of this world. And devil worship is an old thing. It's an old established custom because it's not something that's new, Devil worship is people think about devil worship. First of all, Satan put it in their minds and this devil. It's got to have the horns, and the cloven feet, and the pointed tail, and the pitchfork in their hand, and this evil being and so forth. Just the opposite of what Yahweh says, as He describes Satan to be. But that's all deception. To make them think that if they don't see something like that, to them that's the incarnation of evil. If they don't see something like that, then it's certainly got to be okay. I mean, what's wrong with looking and lusting and committing fornication and adultery and sodomy and so forth with all of these people? I mean, there's nothing wrong. It don't look wrong, to the eye. It looks pleasing. And that's exactly what Satan said in the very beginning, Did Yahweh really say that? I mean, come on, Eve, look at this. Did Yahweh say that? And she deceived. And it says that everything, sin began to look pleasing in the eyes of a person. And it does. So you don't see the evil, you see the pleasure in it. And that's what attracts people to sin. And that's the reason why people sin. And Satan did that from the very beginning. And so this is why she has had control. You remember Yachanaan 5 says, 1 Yachanaan 5 says the whole world is under the control of the evil one. She's got the control. But Satan, devil worship, has been around since the days of Adam and Eve. And then Noah and his sons were the only ones on earth before the flood that did not worship the devil. There were only 8 people. 8 people. Out of how many billions of people? Only 8 people in the time of Noah. They were the only ones. Out of how many billions of people were alive at that time? Only 8 people. And remember, in the way the scriptures are written, it makes it look like as if whenever it came about that things were different. But when we look at it, we see that Noah, he was a preacher of righteousness. He preached to the people and he warned the people, look, this is because of sin, we're hurting the firmament, we're destroying these things, and soon it's going to fight back. Okay? You're going to see the ultimate result of your sin, and the firmament is going to go crazy, and you're going to drown, you're going to die because of your evil. Yeah, it's time to repent if you'll repent. But of course, the people chose not to. So out of billions of people on the face of this earth, only 8 people were alive. Now that's important to remember, and it's important to believe, because Yahshua Messiah spoke about these things, okay? He backed up the prophets. That's why he says you're a fool if you don't believe these things. He talked about Noah. He talked about Daniel. He talked about all of these things that the prophets spoke about, okay? And one of the things he said here was, let me teach you 24:37, but just as in the days of Noah were, so will it also be at the coming of the Son of Man. Just as it was in Noah's time. Well, in Noah's time, there were only a very small group of people. 8 people to be exact, out of billions of people. They're the only ones that were the house of Yahweh that was saved. So, if the coming of the Son of Yahshua in his day is going to be likened to the days of Noah, if there was a very small group, only 8 people to be saved at that time, so it's going to be in the house of Yahweh in these last days. The house of Yahweh is a very small group compared to the billions and billions of people who are on the face of the earth at this time. 7 billion people. So this shows that what Yahshua said was that if you believe the prophets, you will believe that the house of Yahweh will be a small group. But that small group will be saved. That's a promise from Yahweh. And that's what he's saying here. And that's why he stressed so much to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Now, there's a tendency of the deceived world to think that all of these churches and assemblies that you know, surely they can't be wrong in living by these traditions and rejecting Yahweh's laws. But the Holy Scriptures definitely says that anyone who does this is a worshiper of Satan. Plain and simple. If you keep these traditions, then you worship Satan. How can that be? Well, Yahweh says, here's my laws. You must keep my laws. Yahshua gave the example. He says, you reject the laws of Yahweh so that you can keep your traditions, because you can't keep man's traditions and keep the laws of Yahweh, because righteousness and evil don't mix. Yahweh gave us a perfect way from the very beginning. But man had to come up with his own idea, you know, of thinking that something would be better than what it was. And in that means, you know, man was made perfect. Man had perfect understanding of Yahweh's laws. But then he was given the freedom. He had to be given freedom to make his own choices, to make his own mind up. And by making his own mind up, he began to corrupt the perfection that Yahweh has set. And that's why he's gotten away from these things for 6,000 years. But in this time period, now Yahweh is bringing mankind back to that understanding and allowing us to come back to that understanding, to become at one with him. That's why you remember the prophets were told things, but yet they didn't understand them. We're blessed to be able to understand these things and to see these things come to pass. Now, when Yahweh brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, he warned them. He warned all the people of the nations that they were worshiping Satan. And he warned them, and he said, in no uncertain terms, you know, don't practice their way. Don't go and inquire of them, hey, how do you worship your God? I want to find out. That looks pretty interesting. Yeah, what's that over there for? You know, what does that symbolize over there? You know? Well, that's why do you think Satan uses the Christmas tree? Well, it's enticing. Didn't make any sense. Go buy a gift and stick it underneath the tree. You know, you can do that outside and you'll ruin whatever it is that's sticking underneath the tree, the first rain that comes along, right? But set it up in the house and decorate it and make it look all beautiful and stuff. It's all enticing. Like the prophet said, it's nothing but a tree. Don't you have enough sense to realize you just went and chopped down a tree and you stuck it up and you had to fix it so it wouldn't fall over? And because it's dying, you got to decorate it with silver and gold and lights and everything else to make it look like it's something that it isn't. It's death. It symbolizes death. It's dying. But Satan makes it look appealing to a person. They see those lights, they see those colors, and it sucks them into it. And once they've got their attention, then they can start feeding them this other stuff. And that's why children believe in Santa Claus. That's why children believe in the Easter Bunny, because they've been taught these things and they're sucked up into it. Now it gets an age where they'll realize that it's a bunch of lies, but the parents don't care because the parents already had their fun with their little children and taught them these lies and watched them grow up believing it. Just like they grew up and believed it. And just like their parents grew up and believed it. And just like their parents' parents grew up and believed it. And for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, all the children grew up and believed it to a certain time. That's why the prophet said, the time is coming when the people will realize and say, our forefathers have taught us nothing but lies. And by that, when that comes, then their minds are going to be open. They're going to realize that all these traditions and customs that they kept of the pagan holidays and so forth was nothing but lies. Now we can think, boy, that is stupid. Which it is. Granted, it is. But you know what? To these people's minds, it's a beautiful thing. Because they don't have Yahweh's mind. Their minds are blinded. Remember what we read earlier. Their minds are blinded. It's obscured. To them, their ways of understanding is darkened. They can't see the light. All they can see is darkness. So to them, it makes sense to go out and to buy a Christmas tree and to set it up and to put gifts underneath it. And to go into debt and give a gift to your friend. It makes sense to do these things. It makes sense. It's pleasurable. It looks fine in the cardinal mind to go out and commit these sins. Because that's what Satan does. Now, she had to make these things up so that to give them some kind of fulfillment, because they can't enjoy life. Yahshua said, I came so that you might know the right way and that you might enjoy life, right? He says, I came so that you might have abundant life. Well, you can't have abundant life unless you follow the ways of Yahweh. So when they reject the laws of Yahweh, there's this hollow spot within their lives. And they've got to fill it up with somehow or the other. And the only thing you can fill up a hollow spot with is sin. If you're a sinner. If you reject the laws of Yahweh, you're not going to fill yourself up with righteousness. You're just going to fill yourself up with this sin, this deception. And so by being the God of this world, deceiving this world, she sucks them in and she keeps them going with these lies. That's why they live for the weekend, right? And yet, the weekend passes, and the old drudgery starts up, and they go back to work again, and there's no enjoyment in life. They reject any form of enjoyment that they could possibly have. Well, he warned them. He says, look, these nations are going to be there, and he says, don't go and worship their gods. And remember what word God, the God means Elohim, the one who lifts himself up. Okay? And remember, the worship of Satan is simply the rejection of Yahweh. You know, on top of page 270, it says, we read in Psalm 106, verse 37 and 38, which says, and they sacrificed their sons and their daughters to these demons. Now, it's not like they went out and chased their children around, lit a match underneath them, okay, to burn them up. Because, although there were some sacrifices that they did that to, the really wicked-minded people, but other than the deception, they sacrificed themselves to the God, their sons and their daughters to these demons, to these gods. In other words, they gave them to the ways of the worship. They taught them these things and allowed them to grow up, and they did not teach them the truth. Because remember, the scripture says that at one time they did know the truth, but they turned from these things. They turned to, and Yahweh said, I'll give you a reprobate mind because you turn this way. In verse 38, and they shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters. Yeah, they were responsible. Okay? Your children are your responsibility. And if you don't take the time to teach your children, you're going to pay for it. Because you're going to suffer misery later when you see them rebel against the laws of Yahweh, and they're going to rebel against you, and you're going to wonder, why won't they listen? How come I don't have any control over my children? Because you didn't take control over them when you're supposed to, by teaching and leading and guiding them. You don't have to guide them through force, you know. You use a belt only for the fact of disobedience, rebellion. You don't chase after a child and whip them for any other reason, except that they broke the laws of Yahweh. They rebelled against you. However, they better have known what the law of Yahweh was, because you taught them. If you didn't teach them, you can't correct them in that manner, because you have no authority and you're stealing from them and you're actually breaking Yahweh's law if you didn't teach your children to do right and then they rebel against it. So they're our responsibility. And so they said, they shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the gods of Canaan, and the land was defiled with blood. And that's all sorts of blood, you know. That's the blood from the land, the people themselves being defiled and the offspring being born. It's also the defilement of breaking all the sexual sins as written in Leviticus 18. That type of blood that defiles. It's also from wars that the people went through against one another and so forth. And also even hatred towards another person, because we're all of one blood. Remember, we're all of one being. So all these things are defiled. This defilement came about, and all this stuff is combined in there. In Isaiah 57, 4 and 5, the King James says, "Against whom do you sport yourselves?" Yeah, you really think you're something, huh? Top dog, man, in your class. "To whom do you sport yourselves? Against when you make ye a wide mouth and draw out the tongue." Well, you can say all kinds of things, can't you? You know, you can say words that will entice people. You know, like some people just have the gift of gab, man. You know, and they get out there and yap, 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 yap. You know, they can say in 2 pages what a normal person could say in 1 sentence. But boy, you got the people gathered around you and they love to listen to you, don't they? You know? But you can also use that tongue to tear people down. Tear them down, to tear others down, and have nothing righteous to say about someone. So it's a wide mouth, and you draw out the tongue. Remember what the apostle said about the tongue? The tongue can be a devouring fire. Are you not, notice what he says, are you not children of transgressors? Are you not the offspring of those who taught you what you are now living? The whole world is deceived by Satan, and your seed of falsehood. Why? Because there is no truth in Satan's seed. There is no truth in those who teach against the rebellion and the breaking of Yahweh's laws, those who teach to do these things and teach against these things. There is no truth in them. Inflaming yourselves with idols. Yes, you're hot. You're hot. You inflame yourself with the heat and the passion and the desire to go after these idols, after these gods, this way of worship under every green tree. Every place where there's a place for a gathering where people can go. Slaying the children in the valleys and under the cliffs of the rocks. It doesn't matter where, you know, wherever you can teach them, let them go. The back seats of cars or whatever you desire. Let them go out. It's the stupidest thing in the world for someone to do something like that. Now, the word translated idols. This is El, okay, which is God. That's the Canaanite word El and Elohim that you see written in the scriptures. Now, in the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, Volume 1, page 817, says that this word demon, okay, is the same word as God. It's interchangeable. Demon or God, it doesn't matter. So, when you see the word God, you can put the word demon there. It's the same thing. So, what it amounts to is, it's a matter of fact as to whether they worship the demon with the little d or the demon with the big D. Right? Or, in other words, the God with the little g or the God with the big G. Okay? It's the same thing. It's either demon God or God demon. Right? Depending upon how you emphasize as far as with the big letter or the little letter. You know, but remember, they don't have that understanding. To them, you know, the Lord is the Lord of lords, the King of kings, the God of all gods. We're the only ones that understand what's written in Daniel. When the people said, you know, when it talks about the gods, and the people themselves, like even like the king Nebuchadnezzar, referred to Yahweh as God. Because that's what he knew. Remember, the name of Yahweh had been taken away. They squashed the name of Yahweh and took the name of Yahweh out. So when they made this reference to this, Daniel, of course, used the name of Yahweh. He didn't allow that to take place in his writings. So he made it clear to the people. And that's why the king said, your God is the God of all gods. You know. And he said, whoa, king, look, man. Name is Yahweh. Keep it straight. Okay, in the days of Eliah, Satan's prophets outnumbered the prophets of Yahweh 850 to 1. But we read in 1 Kings 18:19, it says, now summon together all of Israel to me on Mount Carmel, as well as the 450 prophets of Baal, or the Lord, and the 400 prophets of Asherah, which is Ishtar, who eat at the table of Beelzebub. Okay? And in the days of the apostle Shaul, the worship of demons still hadn't changed. In 1 Corinthians 10, verses 20 to 21, it says, but I say these things that I say, that the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons, not to Yahweh. And I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of Yahweh and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of Yahweh's table and the table of demons. You see, and that's what they do. Now, you got to remember now, okay, the Catholic Church, they have the communion host, which represents the body of Jesus, and then they have the wine, which represents the blood, and then they have the ceremony, the ritual where they go through, where the piece of bread turns into the flesh of Jesus, and then the blood, the wine becomes the blood. And the priest drinks it in front of everybody, and on certain occasions he would also offer it to the participants, first come, first served. When it ran out, and forget it, you didn't get any. But anyway, and then the host, they would throw out to the people. No, that's what they got. No, never mind. I get carried away here. But the host, they will eat the host, okay? But the Catholic Church is not the only place that does this. Other religions do this as well. Now, the Catholics call it communion. Other churches will call it communion or the Eucharist. Okay, the Eucharist is the official name by the Catholic Church. But what they do is, when they eat that host, they're taking the part of the God and they're eating it, they're consuming it so that that God will become a part of them. And this is an exact imitation and mockery of what Yahweh said. Because you remember what Yahshua said? He says, me and my Father will come to make our abode in you, right? I will be in you and you will be in me. Well, that's why they have the communion, the host. They eat this so that they take this God, and the God becomes part of them, and they become part of the God. And in some instances, and they still do this today, sometimes they may sacrifice a bull. They'll have a bull, and they'll take a little sharp, kind of like an ice pick, and pick it, and it starts spurting blood, the warm blood, right out of the animal as it's pumping out of the heart. And they'll chase it around with a cup, and they'll take a cup of that blood, and they'll start drinking that hot blood, that warm blood. Because when they drink that blood, the bull is a strong animal, right? Well, to them, when they drink that blood, that puts that blood's bull in them, and they become strong. And that blood and the bull actually symbolizes the gods that they worship in the rituals that they do. And they do that with pig's blood as well. But they do become like the God, They become like it. Boy, just think about that, man. If all that DNA that they eaten really started breaking out in the appearance, boy, we'd see a bunch of people looking like pig heads walking around, But you become the God that you worship. That's the thing that Yahweh was trying to point out to him. He says, don't go after these different gods, because they will only bring you further and further away. And Yahweh is a Father of love, and He wanted people to experience the great joy of living. And that's why He's given us His laws, because His laws are proven. They're a proven set of rules that, if you follow, are guaranteed to bring you joy of living. It will give you health, It will give you life everlasting. And there's nothing more than that you would ever possibly want, to enjoy life. But the world, he's also allowed the world to go their separate ways and to break these things. But it all has to do with obedience. He's got to try us to see. And here's the thing, Satan is willing to sacrifice this whole world right now. She's willing to sacrifice 7 billion people on this earth and destroy this earth. She's willing to do it, including herself along with it. That's what it need be, just to bring down Yahweh's plan. But Yahweh says, Satan, you're fighting a losing battle. My plan's going to succeed, and you're going to die along with all those who want to go your way, But that's what she would do if she could. Her desire is to destroy this world. But Yahweh wants a people who are willing to be obedient to him. And it has to be a willing sacrifice. He won't force us. He wants us to be willing. But the world in itself wants to be disobedient. It's not obedient to Yahweh today. If the world was obedient, it would be teaching the laws of Yahweh instead of bringing forth the pagan traditions that they're bringing down. And Satan has brought this from the very beginning. She began to deceive Eve. But it's sad to say, that all churches and the majority of the assemblies, they have embraced the tradition of demonism. They teach, they practice in their worship. Now, they would never admit it. They can't. Because if they ever admitted it, then they would have to admit that they've done wrong. And that the house of Yahweh is true. It is the only place that you've got to worship. And then they would have to give up all of their assemblies, and there are assemblies of God. There are assemblies of the Lord. There are assemblies of God's house. There are assemblies of the house of God. And there's assemblies of Yahweh. But they're not Yahweh's house. There's only one house. There's only one place. That's what we started off with. That's the law of Yahweh. You must go to the place. The place. That's Yahweh speaking. Anybody can argue all that they want. But Yahweh stands firm on his word. He says, I've given you one place. Now either you want to accept that place or you want to reject it. If you reject it, you can go the rest of the world is going, go their way. If you follow it, then you'll have the place where you can learn the everlasting laws that will keep you alive forever, and you become made in my image and in my likeness. So that's what Yahweh's promised unto us. We've got to stop here on page 271. Well, the Kahan can take over next week, and we need to stop. So if everybody please stand. Let's raise our hands. Almighty Heavenly Father Yahweh, this is Kohen Michael Hawkins, asking to come before you as seed of your last day's witness, Yisrayl Hawkins, and through your Son, Yahshua Messiah, the high priest of your house. Thank you, Father, for the great words that you've given unto us and the strength and the encouragement that you have inspired our beloved pastor and overseer to write, Father. As we rehearse these things, Father, let us take them to heart and remember these things so that we can gain the strength and the knowledge and understanding that we need to continue to serve you, Father. We bless you, we thank you, we ask you to go with us this week, help us to overcome the sin in our lives and give us the strength that we need, Father, and continue to bless your house, bless this work, and bless our overseer, continue to watch over him and keep him safe and protected. Bless him with the full use of his subconscious mind, Father, so that he can continue to guide and protect us. Continue to be with the great Gr8 Yisrayl Hawkins, Father, watch over him and strengthen him. We thank you, Father, for your peace, and we ask you to be with us and watch over us this day, for we ask this in Yeshua's name. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh.